Hey, leaders and go-getters. If you're here, you're all about growth, pushing boundaries, stepping up, and making an impact. But when it comes to your career, are you leading the game or just playing along? Whether you're chasing a promotion, switching careers, or just want to stand out, it all starts with one thing: your executive summary. And guess what? We've got the Ultimate Executive Summary e-playbook, and it's 100% free. This step-by-step guide will take you from a blank page to a bold, standout executive summary that grabs attention and gets results. It's time to stop blending in and start owning your career story. Download your free copy now at leadthegame.org/free resources. And while you're there, check out 3 more powerful tools to help you take control of your career. Don't let your resume ride the bench. Get in the game. Head to leadthegame.org/free resources and grab your free e-playbook today. Now back to the show.
Welcome to What's on Your Bookshelf, a life and leadership podcast where we live out loud the pages of the books that are on our shelves, with your host, Denise Russo and Sam Powell.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of What's on Your Bookshelf. This is our life and leadership podcast where we're living out loud and deep diving into the pages of the books that are on our bookshelves. My name is Denise Russo. My co-host and friend Sam Powell and I are reading through a book called The Obstacle is the Way, best-selling book by Ryan Holiday. This book is in 3 parts. We are now in the 3rd part of the book called The Will. And I'm looking forward to this chapter with you today, Sam, more than I felt like last week, because I realized that the name of the chapter, which is about thinking negatively, was actually pretty positive.
It is. Yeah. So this is anticipation, thinking negatively, and the art of acquiescence, which neither of those things sound good on the surface, but bear with us. It'll be good stuff in the end here. But I love how all of these chapters begin with a quote, and I love this one that is, offer a guarantee and disaster threatens. And like, if that's not one of the most true things about life, I don't know what is.
Yes. Oh my goodness. So what I loved about the beginning of this chapter is that it's super applicable to the business world. So if you've ever had a project or a launch of a product, or maybe you've had an experience where something didn't go well at work, typically, or at least in the tech world where Sam and I came from, you would have a meeting called a post-mortem after a release, after a launch, after a sale, after some transformation, maybe reorg, a postmortem of what went wrong. What can we look back at so that we can prepare to not have that happen in the future? However, this book, I think, has come up with something that I wish that I would have applied back then, that I'm definitely going to apply going forward, which is called a pre-mortem. So I'm curious, when you read this part of the chapter, Sam, what you thought about a pre-mortem concept and the negativity that is around that to prepare you so that the post-mortem is probably not as painful.
I loved it. As somebody who has sat through countless escalations and been yelled at by I don't know how many VPs and C-suite executives because of escalations, I love this concept. I love the idea of thinking about something as if it all went wrong, as if right? It's like, sit down and, okay, this has failed. Now what do we do, right? What's the reaction, right? The release didn't go well. The product launch was terrible. The plan, the presentation totally flopped, whatever it is. Thinking about it from that and then preparing for that. I love it because I also think that it helps us build a tolerance to failure, right? Because if you want to succeed in life, you have to be really good at failing, really, 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 really good at it. And I'm learning this lesson hard over and over and over again as I build a business. and I've learned it in my career, throughout the years in the corporate world. And just in my personal life too, right? You've got to get good at failing. And I love the idea of a pre pre-mortem, of anticipating the negative things that will happen so that you're ready for them, right? And again, like, it just made me think of solve for happy, right? If I set my expectation at failure, then like I'm never not happy. Like, I failed. Hooray, I did it. Like, you know, okay, that was one out of the way. However many more to go, but it's fine. Like, we'll figure it out. So I love this. I just want to do this with everything in my life. Everything I attempt needs a pre-mortem.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have to credit Gary Klein. He's a psychologist that came up with this. And so the idea is, before you launch something, it's easy to think about all the good that's going to come from it. You're going to get a lot of customers. You're going to enhance your brand. You're going to make money. You'll elevate the success of your company. But what Gary Klein says is that a pre-mortem is to envision all the things that are the blind spots. What could go wrong? What will go wrong? Anything that you can think about in advance of starting it, because then if you plan for that, and it's not saying to plan to fail in life, it's just saying that plan that if you do fail, well, then what? Then what will you do? And then you won't be as shocked as well. And so I thought that part was really reassuring, where he was saying, okay, if something doesn't go the way you planned it would, but you've already accepted that it might not go the way you planned it would, then that kind of pain isn't as bad, because you could have said, well, I thought that if it didn't go well, this could be it. And I'm not saying in positive intelligence wise that you should think about things not being successful. Certainly there's a lot of value in putting out positive energy into the atmosphere when you launch them. You don't go into something in order to fail. But if you go into it in order to succeed, but knowing that if you don't, that it's okay. It's probably like Thomas Edison. I don't remember how many light bulbs the whole story says that he created until the right one was the one that lit up, right? Hundreds, right?
Exactly.
And you think about today, I have these lights in my front yard that have a little remote control that you could change the colors on.
Oh, that's fine.
I mean, that was not even in his mind, right? LED lights and lights that people put on their cars. Like this wasn't even a concept for Edison. So he didn't stop at the last light bulb and think, well, that's the last one. But he also didn't stop at the one that wasn't the right one. He kept going because he had will to keep it going until he thought, okay, that I'm okay with that version of it. And maybe that's what makes inventors and scientists so good, because they're continuously looking to improve the product.
Yeah. And I think this is all in the context of will. And so this is building up that inner citadel that we talked about last time, and, building up that discipline of the heart of who you are and your, I keep calling it a drumbeat of moving forward. But this is that part of that citadel has to include anticipating the bad things. I always say you should plan and dream from a positive place, right? You should get into that positive mindset in order to set the lofty goals, in order to, do the vision work and things like that. But you should act from a place of neutrality. What is it going to take to do this? And part of that is accepting that things are going to happen. And he says here, always prepared for disruption, always working that disruption into our plans, right? We're assuming that's baseline, that we're anticipating obstacles, we're anticipating things. And so that's always part of what we do. It reminds me of this process that in one of the iterations of one of the organizations I was a part of, we had this operational process that we pulled together. And so when we were building out a new program or a new process or things like that, it would be a 3-day adventure every time. And day one was planning out the whole pathway. If you envision the subway map of you could go this way or this way or this way or this way. It's somebody comes in, this is the trigger, and then what are all the ways and paths you could go down, and then what's that trigger? Building out that whole kind of visual matrix of how does this process work and all the avenues you could go down. So you build up and design this beautiful process. So you end day one and you're I love this. This is so great. It's wonderful. And day two, you would come in and rip the whole thing apart, and you would talk about every single failure point. It actually probably was a pre-mortem without using that term at all, but it was, we would tear it to shreds. And so you kind of ended the day with like a, gosh, this is just a little bit depressing. But then you would sort of turn it around in, okay, well, let's rank the likelihood of these things happening. Let's figure out which ones we need contingencies for. And then let's accept that, you know, we're okay if some of these failure points happen, right? Like, because the likelihood's not high. And if it is, like, we have an idea of what to do, but we don't need to build anything around that. But we do need to build for the top 10 because those things are likely and they're bad if they happen, right? So it was like the likelihood versus severity type of a matrix you were building out. But it was, the whole process was under the assumption that you're going to build this wonderful process and it is going to fall apart in places. And so it's just, what are we ready for it, right? This was like an operational readiness review, I think was the, like what we called it, but it was, how is it going to work? What are we ready for? And it always built in what they're talking about here, this just disruption that's going to happen. And I love what he says here, if this comes as a constant surprise each and every time it occurs, you're not only going to be miserable, you're going to have a much harder time accepting it and moving on to attempts number 2, 3, and 4. And so, like, again, it's just that when I am working on something, when I'm going down a path, it's no surprise when we fail because I'll just get back up and try again.
This is really hard to do on your own. It's another good reason why it's best to get a coach, a qualified business coach to walk with you through this. I had a client this past week, and the client is expecting that they're going to lose their job in August. No one has said that they're going to lose their job in August, but there's just that anticipation and expectation, like the writing is on the wall, that there's a layoff coming and the person thinks they're going to be impacted. So the book, actually, I used this straight out of the book with this particular client. And I have to tell you, it was a really difficult conversation because the person didn't have the will in the moment. Now, this was the first time that we talked through the situation, so hopefully we're going to be able to strengthen those muscles. But Ryan Holiday says, if you were to go through this, no matter what your situation is listening on the phone, maybe you just had a job transformation, or maybe you want there to be, or maybe you're growing in your job and you want another promotion, or maybe you have something personally going on that you want to change in your life. He makes it pretty simple, which I used in this call with this person, which is, okay, imagine if you don't have surprises with what you think is going to happen. So the way he outlines it is, it's called like a what if exercise, which I think is brilliant because I'm writing a book about sort of the same thing.
I thought about you.
Yeah. And I wrote in the margin, when are you going to finish writing your book? So I probably should get to finishing that book. But so here's what Ryan Holiday says. What if blank? So what if blank happens? Whatever it is that you're thinking of as you're listening to the show. Well, then he says, then I will blank. So if this thing happens, what will I do? I will blank. Then he says, well, here's another example. Well, what if that thing happens? He says, instead, I'll just blank. And then he does it one more time. Well, what if this blank thing happens? And he says, no problem. We can always blank. It's an alternative. And so in any of those three instances, it's then I will do this, or instead I'll just do that, or no problem, we can always do this other thing. There's always a way around the obstacle.
Yeah. And he says, like, it's towards the end of the chapter, but he says, like, we're ready to be driven off course because we've plotted the way back, right? And it's that anticipation of what are the things that could go wrong here? What are the things that are going to happen? And how do we find our way back, right? And I think about this with like Atomic Habits, right? As he always says, like, never miss 2 days, like, right? Like, just keep going. And it's that, okay, so if my plan to develop this habit fails, what's the path back to it, right? Like, when the system breaks down, what's the process to get back, back on board? Or what's the thing that we pick back up to get back moving in the, in the direction that we really, really wanted to. And I think about a lot of like the little micro systems I have set up in my life of like, to-do lists and, management of like little tasks and things. Like I have all these little micro systems that help me get back to it. Like, oh, I'm off track. This isn't what I wanted. This isn't the life that I'm trying to build here and design here. And so I'm anticipating that. So, okay, the path back is, this easy thing to get back into it. It's like, okay, well, we just start from here and we go back to where we wanted to get to. And I think that it's that like just being prepared for it. And he says like, the world might call you a pessimist, but so what? And rather seem like a little bit of a downer than be blindsided or caught off guard. And I'm here for that. Even as somebody who is eternally optimistic, I think it's an optimistically pessimistic way to look at the world, right? Like I believe there's a path back, and so I'm gonna just plan for it.
Maybe the key is it's not so much about pessimism, but it's taking the emotion out of it. So it's not about being negative, it's about being neutral, right? Like you don't have to have an emotion tied to the thing. And maybe this is a good reason for you to go back to the episodes, friends, on intentional living, which was way early in our series, or the Happiness Project, which again, it's not about happy-go-lucky. It's about finding happiness in little small moments. And this isn't about being negative. It's about being prepared. So this chapter for me ended, I wrote a note and it says, wow, I feel like his last sentence was sort of negative, but it's sort of real because there's a benefit to being positive, but there's also a downside of not being realistic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's it. It's that radical acceptance of obstacles are going to be part of your path. And so I'm planning for it. I'm moving for it. And we move into the next chapter here, which is the Art of Acquiescence. I love the quote at the beginning of this one too, that says, the fates guide the person who accepts them and hinder the person who resists them. And so it's this is more that essence of like, I understand that I can't do everything, right? Like I am not, I'm not a super talented artist, right? And if I wanted to become one, the hill to climb is very steep. Could I do it? Yeah, but it's going to be really hard. And so it's that like acquiescing to this isn't who I am. Like what am I more talented in, right? Like maybe I can't draw, but I could write, right? And this talks about Thomas Jefferson, about how he was a terrible public speaker, which is like, again, kind of funny. Like I never would have thought of him as a terrible public speaker because all that's left is his written words. And those are so great, but he was a writer, right? Not a speaker. And so it's kind of this lesson of like, and I think it sets the tone for this chapter of, I don't know, looking in the mirror, figuring out who you are and working from that place.
It sort of for me said things like, don't focus on what you don't have. Don't focus on what you can't do. Focus on what you do have and what you can do. And I highlighted this part in this chapter that says, you're not the only one who has to accept things you don't necessarily like in life, right? It's part of the human condition. It's just life. There will sometimes be things that you don't like or that you don't want to accept, and it's just life. And then this particular part of the chapter, I wrote down my friend Wendy, her name, and my friend Vicky. So, we lost my friend Wendy that we've talked about on episodes in the past. She passed away from really terrible cancer. And my friend Vicky, though, is another friend of mine that I went to college with, and she has been enduring brain cancer for years. And so this chapter talks about how when a doctor gives you orders or a diagnosis, even if it's the opposite of what you wanted, what do? You accept it. You don't have to like it or enjoy the treatment, but you know that denying it only delays the cure. And with my friend Vicky, we both went through this experience of watching our friend Wendy pass away. But one of the things I appreciate so much about my friend Vicky is her positive attitude. And I have a feeling that in itself is really helping to heal her. In fact, my dad had sinus cancer many years ago. It was like one of only 65 people in the world that they knew ever had this kind of a cancer. My dad had it. And the doctor, after going through all the process of trying to go through radiation and different things, he said all these things bad would happen to my dad. You're going to lose your taste. You're going to lose your sense of smell. You're probably going to lose all of your bottom teeth, and likely all of the bones in your bottom jaw will crumble away.
Jeez.
So he was like preparing for the bad.
Yeah.
Now, my dad, by the way, can smell, can taste, or at least we think he can, unless he tricks himself into thinking he's tasting stuff, but didn't lose a single tooth and nothing happened to his bones. And he's cancer free and has been for many years. And I remember the doctor telling him years ago, you're like a miracle, but I think that really the only reason that you got through all of this, besides radiation and medical, because I'm not opposed to the fact that when you need medicine, there's a purpose for it. But he said to my dad, I think that you survived this and thrived through it because of positive intelligence. Mm-hmm. The way that your mindset was and the will you had to live is what got you through it, and not just through it in a difficult way, but got you to the end. Now, it doesn't mean that just because you're positive, you're going to live if you have a diagnosis in that way, because Wendy was probably one of the most positive people that I knew in life. But here's the reality that this chapter talks about. It's about acceptance. Things happen. The shot won't go in, the stock goes down, the weather's disrupted, but he says, try to have an attitude of gratitude and just say, c'est la vie. It's all going to be fine. It's like what you were saying is you're going to fail, you get back up again. Oh, well, next time that failure's done. Let's get to the next one.
Yeah. And I like how he phrases it here. He says, that is not to say we allow it to prevent us from reaching our ultimate destination, but it does change the way we travel to get there and the duration of the trip. Right. So it's like these things happen, but if we are accepting of that they are here and they are reality, right? Then we have to move, we work with, we integrate it into the journey. We integrate it into, just part of what we're going through and what we're experiencing. And he says in here, he's like, if somebody took traffic signals, like red, yellow, green traffic signals personally, we would judge them insane. Yet this is exactly what life is doing to us. It tells us to come to a stop here, or the intersection is blocked, or, that you have to reroute in a way. And we can't argue or yell the problem away, right? Like just because it's red light, you can't sit there and yell at the red light. Be like, you need to stop being a red light. Like it will actually change, but but you have to accept that you have to stop for a moment, right? Like we just accept it and we don't integrate it personally. And so when we're coming across those things in life, these obstacles that happen to us, like you think of it like a traffic light, right? Like don't take it personally. It is what happened. It is the situation. And so how do you acquiesce to it? How do you accept it and integrate it in?
I think if you approach life in that way, where you just have to say, this is what it is, and not that you have to accept it, because that's the point of taking action to change your circumstances the best you can within the controllables, right? So Ryan Holiday must have been on a presidential kick, because then he goes on and talks about George Washington, he talks about Eisenhower, and he talks about how they all went through these challenges, but they went through the challenges with the belief that, well, whatever's going to happen will happen, and then we'll just go from there. It doesn't mean they didn't have a plan. It doesn't mean they didn't have a strategy. It doesn't mean that they didn't think through, well, if this happens, then what? It doesn't mean that they didn't do a pre-mortem. It was that they accepted that no matter what the outcome is, as long as we went into it prepared and we did the very best that we could do, then whatever happens is then going to happen. So Olivia's kind of dealing with that now, because she just graduated from college. And so she's looking for jobs and trying to figure out this next chapter in her life.
It's a hard transition.
It's hard. It's hard.
That's a hard transition.
We just started talking about this idea that if you could just control the controllables and leave the rest to God. In fact, there's a quote in here. It says, as the saying goes, man proposes, but God disposes. So just there's things that you can control, but there's so many more things in life that you can't control. And so in the end of this chapter, and I know we're almost out of time as well, I have written on my page, lead the game, Sam, right at the top of my page 149, because it talked about how if you want to use the metaphor that life is a game, it means playing the dice or the chips or the cards where they fall. And when you play it where it lies, a golfer would say, the way of life is give you plenty to work with, plenty to leave your imprint on, and just to enjoy the journey. And I often recommend the book, The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. And if you've never read that, friends, it's for sure a book for your bookshelf. And it's all about a book of this story of this person that went on a journey, expecting something other than what he experienced, but he found through the process that he was enjoying the journey of getting to where he wanted to go. And so he ends here with some important points that I'll close our session with today. But before I do, Sam, any other closing thoughts on this chapter?
This one reminds me of like taking the back roads. Like, like we're also focused on like taking the highway, getting there fast, right? Like doing all this stuff. But like, I think you got to live it more like the back roads. Like there might be a cow in the road. There might be some crazy little thing. You might have to slow down to 20 miles an hour. You might have to, speed up again, like in some places, like, and you have to expect that life is going to look more like a back road than it will a highway, right? Like when we're on a highway, we just don't expect there to be stops. Ever. You should for safety's sake, but like, right, please do. But we don't, right? Whereas like when we're taking these like little windy back roads or whatever, and I live in Western Pennsylvania, so we have a lot of those. I expect disruption, like, more so. And so it's less of a grievance as to when I come in a standstill traffic on the highway. And so I think that that's what this is really about, is like, if you can, like in the last chapter right there that we started talking about here, if you can plan for all of those things, right? I build in the extra time I need, then you can enjoy that journey more, and you can just accept it as it comes around. Like, okay, maybe now I have to go around, and maybe now I see something I wouldn't have seen before, right? I think about those days where it's like, we're going to take the long way, and whatever happens, happens. And at least we found this really cool, really cool thing that happened to my son and I. We found this town called Onion Town, which is like hilarious, right? And so we still talk about that, as we were driving back on this crazy adventure, and it just ended up being something fun. And I think that like if you can expect that and like just go with it, you're gonna be, I don't know, just a lot happier and a lot better prepared for obstacles.
What a perfect segue about what we're talking about next week. So next week's chapter shifts. It's called Love Everything That Happens. And so this is exactly what you're talking about. So in order to love everything that happens, the wrap up for this week is you're resilient. You're able to handle anything that occurs in your life. You have the resilience. Coming soon will be some content that we're creating about resilience and stress and burnout. You'll see me posting some of it on LinkedIn, but you're resilient and you have the ability to bounce back. The second thing is that you can't do anything about the things that are outside of your span of control. So why are you wasting your energy doing that? The third piece of the summary for this week is that don't sweat the small stuff. If you're looking enough at the big picture and a long enough timeline, then you'll realize that whatever you're going through, like, oh gosh, we have to turn on this back road, it's just a blip in time. But that experience that you had with your son, how cool that now that's going to be a memory, sort of like the movie Inside Out, Disney Pixar, where you have these implanted memories, and those memories come in times that maybe are the least expected.
Yeah.
So, all right, friends, I'm looking forward to next week. And again, it's going to be about loving everything that happens, which sometimes is hard to do. But for this week, we're going to close for today. My name is Denise Russo. My friend is Sam Powell. We thank you for joining us. If you're getting value from these episodes, would you share them with others? That really will help us as well. And we'd love to hear from you as well. So our great producer, Zach Elliott, has ways for you to reach us in the show notes. Thanks, Zach. Giving you a shout out for being an awesome producer of this series. Thank you. And we'll see you next time, next Wednesday. Every week we have new episodes that come out. And this has been another episode of What's on Your Bookshelf.